everybody, it's Drybear. And it's time to talk about Battlefield 6. They just had two open beta weekends back to back. So last weekend, basically last weekend and the weekend before, a ton of experience, a lot of people got eyes on it, and I wanted to give my perspective today about Battlefield 6 and where it sits. And, you know, before we dive into it, I do have a preference for tactical shooters, you know, Rainbow Six Siege, Counter-Strike. I spent most of my time in Counter-Strike-like games, so I definitely am not more of the Call of Duty audience, so if you're looking for bias representation. And also keep in mind that I'm generally a sniper rifle player. I like precision rifles, marksman rifles, bolt rifles, and sniper rifles, so a lot of the footage I'm going to show on screen is going to be me using a sniper rifle, so take that for what you will. But let's talk about where Battlefield 6 sits, if I can recommend it as a new upcoming shooter game, and kind of where, you know, what they've been doing with Battlefield Studios and their development process going forward, because realistically, you know, in general, a lot of the shooters over the last 2 years or so have been struggling pretty hard. A lot of the, you know, Call of Duty games have not been hitting the mark they wanted. They've gotten a little bit more laid back or lax, and there's been a lot of focus and hype around this game specifically. So after playing it a bunch in the beta weekends, let's talk about where Battlefield 6 is now. Overall, the game is incredibly solid. Like, if you're just looking for a good shooter to play, I think not only does it have a large amount of player base and interest, a lot of people are going to be picking up the game and really diving in and enjoying it, but also just like as an ex-developer, I can tell you that the game is really well made. The environments, the color treatment, the realism, the fidelity, all of it is really, really sharp. And honestly, I was just very impressed with the way it sounds, the way it looks, the way it feels when you're running around, and how they actually put the game together. So I think from that core standpoint, obviously that is not the end-all be-all of what makes games good in the first place, but it is very important to pay attention to, because a lot of times, you know, that can be a big contributing factor, especially to a game that gets a ton of money poured into it. We have games like Concord and stuff like that with $400 million poured in and still does not reach the level of fidelity and how impressive a game can look like Battlefield 6 looks. So overall, without getting into personal preferences or the genre in general or what people expect out of games like this, if you're just looking for a well-made, well-engineered, high-fidelity game to play, I think Battlefield 6 hits all of those marks in spades. Oftentimes you'd be running through and just, you know, it does have that Battlefield chaos where there's explosions going off, your screen is shaking all the time, there's visuals and smoke and all of that just coming together. So the game, just like sound effects, VFX, the way the maps are laid out, the detail of the maps, the design of the maps and how they flow, I think all of it looks really good and is well implemented in general. Now, if I were to have like a primary sticking point for the game that may or may not turn people towards the game or turn them away from it, is it really does feel like it's a Call of Duty game that's wearing a Battlefield costume for Halloween. The core gameplay, especially on these small and medium-sized maps, feels very close to Call of Duty, and it doesn't kind of hit that old school like 1942 or Battlefield 1 playstyle. It's much faster, and there's a lot more tight corridors. People are spawning around you constantly, so it is going to feel, for the most part, more like a Call of Duty than a Battlefield. And I have to wonder if they have metrics, especially from 2042 and some of the most recent Battlefields, that show that the people that buy and play shooters like this for long hours and spend money and buy microtransactions are probably the people that like the faster shooters. So it's gonna feel more like Call of Duty, maybe even reaching levels of like Apex Legends as far as like speed and intensity. You do still have down moments, you have planning moments, and especially when you play the few large maps that exist in the game, the 32 versus 32 64-player maps, you will feel a little bit of the old Battlefield, but you will also run into those situations where it's going to feel real fast, real intense, and there's also some crazy movement that goes along with it as well. A good example of this is this clip from Stone Mountain 64. Now, he is a shooter content creator, so he's got a lot of experience in this, but keep in mind that what you're watching right now is not Call of Duty, it is not Black Ops, it is not Apex Legends. This is Battlefield, what you're seeing right here. And the speed, the flipping, the dolphin diving, the sliding, the jumping, the zooming, right? Like, this kind of speed and intensity is not something that we've seen historically from most Battlefield games, especially not the ones that were the most popular overall. So you kind of have to just adapt to the fact that there is a higher intensity with Battlefield 6 that comes along with the gameplay in general, and especially with how you're playing and what you're doing. And I think for some people that's going to be a positive. I think there are a lot of younger folks that, like, you know, play pretty much only shooters of this caliber and shooters of this quality. They play pretty much only these games, and they want faster. I've even had people say that, hey, it could be even faster. It's not even as fast as it could be. And there's definitely people that like are of my persuasion that prefer tactical shooters, methodical shooters, you know, holding a front line and be able to move that line of scrimmage forward, knowing where the players are, and you have, you know, all this built up for a single moment of action. You have the Rainbow Six Sieges and the, you know, the Counter Strikes and that sort of thing. Even some of the more like methodical shooters that aren't more tactical in that nature. I think those people are probably going to be a little surprised with just in general how fast this game can feel. And you have a wide range of maps to choose from as well. And there have been a couple interviews about this in general, about like why they decided to do this kind of higher movement speed. I have a strong inkling that the reason that they did this is because it's just what the market wants right now. There's probably, you know, the people that are older like me in their 30s that are still gaming that want the more tactical shooters are probably in the smaller cohort of people that actually play these kinds of games. And so they say that they want to make sure we hit the full octane version of Battlefield on the head. And I think there's kind of like a discussion right now around, is this even Battlefield anymore? And you can decide for yourself whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, that it just generally has more options for higher movement and higher intensity, whereas kind of the older Battlefields were a lot more about positioning, using vehicles, and also reinforcement, like being able to get on an aircraft carrier and position properly to steal planes from an enemy team and do things like that. That's what Battlefield is to me, not necessarily this high-octane, super fast gameplay. Now, to be fair, that's something that I think is a bit of a detractor for me. I kind of want a little bit more of those large maps, but I will say that I had a ton of fun on the smaller maps, like, you know, the King of the Hill and like the domination modes that are just super tight-knit, very intense, lots of spawning, enemies everywhere. I did have a lot of fun playing with that, even though I mean, I don't have the aim that I used to have, I don't have the reaction speed that I used to have. It still was really fun, and I did enjoy my time kind of running around and doing that, but I think that's going to be a big point of contention for some people. There's going to be a cohort of players that really, really like that speed, and there's going to be some that really don't, and you have to decide whether that's for you or not. Another negative, especially for me, has been the flight. I'm actually, like, I love flying in games, maybe not to the level of, like, you know, Microsoft Flight Sim, but I play a lot of Star Citizen. I love flight, and one of the things that I love about Battlefield is getting in a plane and having dogfights. However, I was very excited about getting into try flight in this game, and it was sorely disappointed with the flight model and the stiffness. You had to basically, if you're doing mouse and keyboard, and I get that they want to build the game for console in general, but I feel like if you need an analog stick or a joystick to fly, it just feels really bad. Like, this is like first attempts. Obviously, there's some finesse to this. You can get really good at flying in this game, but I was very disappointed by the sheer lack of a polished flight model for how the vehicles work in air. You had to max out your sensitivity all the way, like maximum 100 to 150 sensitivity to have any chance of being able to turn around. Like, this is me here moving my mouse in strong strokes across the mouse pad just to get the aircraft to turn around. It felt very stiff. It felt like I was flying a cruise ship or a refrigerator that just couldn't turn around, and it just felt so bad, to the point where I even just stopped trying to get into the aircrafts. On top of that, there was definitely some issues where, you know, even on the largest maps, only one aircraft could be up at a time, which on a 32-person team, if only one of your 32 people can actually use the aircraft, I feel like that doesn't feel very Battlefield to me. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be really good at this, but I think that, you know, honestly, the way it's set up right now, it seems like the only real way you're going to be able to fly comfortably in Battlefield 6, whether it's helicopters or planes, it feels like you're going to need an analog stick or a joystick. You have to have, like, if you're playing on PC, plug in your controller, use that, or if you have a flight stick, use that. Otherwise, it just feels really stiff and really hard to fly around. Controlling the camera feels awkward as well. And so, yeah, someone who, I loved all the aircraft carriers in most of like the first 4 or 5 Battlefield games. I enjoyed getting in the aircrafts, flying around, and like mastering moving around. However, you know, after playing Star Citizen a bunch and even like Dune Awakening, I feel like has better flight model than Battlefield 6 for a company, Battlefield Studios, that has been doing flight for so long, for as well as they actually did it before. I was very disappointed with how the aircraft fly, and hopefully they have some improvements coming along in future updates before the game actually launches to not only make the flight model feel better for the aircraft, but also to make it feel way better on mouse and keyboard. And I think that's kind of the drama right now with Battlefield 6, is a lot of people go into Battlefield, like with them saying like, hey, we're returning to the old style of Battlefield. A lot of people had trouble with the most recent Battlefields like 2042, just not feeling like Battlefield, and so they wanted to walk back and do the old style. When you jump in and you play the game, it feels like kind of like a core Call of Duty experience. And then when you go to the large maps, which currently in the beta there was only one large map, and even on the large map there was a heavy restriction on the amount of vehicles that you can use, especially vehicles that fly. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to include elements from old Battlefield games that gamers may like remember and look back on fondly, while still creating kind of like a core, Zoomer generation, high intensity shooter that those kind of people would really enjoy. And they're trying to fit that all into one game. Overall, I would say it's moderately successful. There's going to be, certain modes that you can queue for. And in the game as well, you can set up a custom queue where you can turn off certain modes and turn off certain maps. If they add more maps to the game, and especially more medium to large size maps, I think people are going to really enjoy that. I hope they ease up on some of the aircraft restrictions in general. And I do think that the tanks and ground vehicles are pretty fine. Like, they actually have good counters. You can run recon with your C4s. You can run engineers with your rocket launcher and take them out. You can actually put up, set up traps for the tanks as well. And there's a good amount of engineer repairing. There's plenty of people that can jump on the outside of the tank or inside the tank. I've had a tank of like 8 people roll up into a capture point and start blasting it in general. So there's definitely a lot of really cool ground combat from the vehicles. And I think on the maps that have the ground vehicles, it does feel very Battlefield in general. But I would say that the aircrafts and the large maps that are supposed to be old school Battlefield, I think, in my opinion, are missing the mark. It doesn't feel like they are big enough for Battlefield. They also don't feel like they're kind of, playing into that multiple aircrafts, mobilizing helicopters like BF Vietnam and stuff like that, mobilizing planes like we had in 1942 or like Battlefield 2 or 1 or things like that. It feels like it doesn't really quite scratch that itch, and I think if they could manage to do that, it would feel really good. But if you're looking for like a shooter like what you're seeing on screen of just fighting, shooting, playing a shooter with, different size maps, I did have a good time with like King of the Hill and some of the smaller modes that, feel a little bit more like Call of Duty. It's almost like Call of Duty, but slightly slower, or Apex Legends, but a little bit slower, maybe a little bit more than Call of Duty, for that same kind of play. Next, let's dive into a little bit of the nitpicky territory. There's a couple things about the way Battlefield 6 plays that I think that are pretty bad right now, but they're very solvable issues. Like either with a day one patch or with whatever build they're working on internally, they could very easily create some changes or a change list that gets implemented that's actually really, really perfect. But there's a couple things about the game right now that feel really awkward. The first one is going to be the respawns in the game. Now, you have to remember that a lot of these modes are very ticket based, like, how many people are alive or dead, how many deaths you have on your team. And there's also a lot of mechanics in Battlefield that allow you to hot spawn in certain locations, like spawning on squad mates is a way of hot spawning. What I mean by that is it's not a designated spawn location. It tries to create an ad hoc location to spawn your character in based on you spawning on a teammate, which is a big deal. And there's also respawn beacons that the recon class can put down pretty much anywhere. Like, you can find any spot out in the field and spawn it. So I think no matter what, if you're spawning on a squad mate or you're spawning on a respawn beacon, it's going to be very hard to make respawns feel really good. However, I do think that there are some major problems with the respawn system, specifically for capture points, points of interest, and locations, where it just gets really, really bad to the point where you will respawn. Like, you'll respawn in the crosshairs of an enemy. You'll respawn on top of an enemy. I've literally respawned at a distance where I could like reach out and touch the enemy, or they were looking at me directly, or I've respawned out in the open, like in a completely open courtyard with enemies in all directions. Like, they're above me, they're below me, they're to my left, they're to my right, and I spawn like butt naked in the open part of a courtyard surrounded by enemies, and then you die instantly, and then you respawn in the same spot, and then you die instantly, and it just gets so awkward the way they handle respawns. And if you look online, you can find some really good, clear representations of this, but you literally have tons of footage of people like walking upstairs and an enemy spawns a foot behind them. Like, no joke, you're walking up a stair, like right here. So he's in a tank and he's shooting, and an enemy just spawned in the crosshairs of the tank. out in the open, in an open area right in front of you, and you just die instantly. I feel like they need way better respawn logic to make it not feel so freaking awkward to just spawn and instantly die because the game decided that you were going to spawn right in front of an enemy. Like, right, look at this. He's aiming, and then poop, enemy, dead. Like, he spawned in the direction of it. So either with better line of sight checks or, you know, better designations of where to spawn, boop, enemy spawns right in front of you, enemy spawns right behind you. I've literally had people, like, I was moving through a building, someone spawned 2 feet behind me and then knifed me in the back because they spawned, you know, a spitting distance away from me, or, like, you know, right out of my line of sight, so I couldn't see them. And I think that is something that needs to be polished for the full release to actually make it feel really good, because the respawns in this game can be incredibly awkward and very frustrating because you spawn and then you get killed, and it's not like you just spawned. Like, you're an innocent little babe. You weren't trying to go anywhere specifically. It's just someone spawned on you. And I think that sort of thing can grate on you over time, especially if you're playing a game to try and grind out all the challenges, unlock all the attachments and weapons and stuff like that. And you're trying, especially when you have like a really close game and you're super into it and you're super excited about it and you're trying to win, and then you get killed and you're like 1 ticket behind, and then you spawn in an open courtyard in front of a tank and die instantly, -1 ticket, and then you spawn again in front of an enemy and die instantly, -2 tickets. I think that sort of thing can grate on you really hard over time and can get incredibly frustrating. So I hope that they do some changes for the live release to try and smooth out the respawn system. Again, keep in mind, there's going to be some situations where this can't be prevented, right? Like, if you are spawning on a teammate and there's enemies nearby but they're not in combat, because in Battlefield 6, if you're spawning on a squad mate and they're in combat, it won't let you spawn on them. But if they're just exited combat, but they're still surrounded by enemies, it's going to be hard for the logic and the programming to actually figure out a safe spot to spawn you when you're spawning in an area full of enemies. And the same thing goes for respawn beacons, right? Maybe you have a respawn beacon on a respawn beacon on a capture point that's surrounded by enemies, like they just took the point, but your respawn beacon hasn't been destroyed yet. It's going to be hard for the game to actually find a safe spot to spawn you in general. But also, this happens even just with normal respawns. Like, you're spawning on a capture point and you don't know who's there. There's no enemies on the map. No one spotted anything. And then you appear with 3 enemies with their crosshair already on your body when you respawn, and you die instantly. You have that happen 3 or 4 times in a row, and you're not going to be a very happy camper. The next thing that's worth talking about, and I can totally see this going both ways. Again, being an older gamer, being someone who preferred the earlier Battlefields, my preference is for classes to maintain their identity. I know they rolled support and medic into one for, you know, resupplying and rezzing teammates and healing teammates and stuff like that. But I feel like they made a pretty controversial change with Battlefield 6 that has kind of split the player base in two. Some people like it, some people hate it, and I'm on the side of thinking that it's not really a good change, and that is, you can pretty much use any weapon you want with any class. The freedom is quite nice. The fact that you can kind of choose whatever weapon you want is quite nice. If you prefer to use a certain type of weapon, then you can use that on all classes for the most part. But I think there's definitely a loss of class identity in Battlefield 6 where, you know, if I'm a recon using a shotgun and rushing people down, I feel like that's what Assault is for. If I'm an engineer, you know, if I'm a different character, like there's certain specialty weapons and deployables and throwables that can only be locked per class. But for the most part, you can use whatever weapon you want. And I feel like if you're going to have a class-based game, having like almost no restrictions on weapons kind of kills that a little bit. I like the old Battlefield style of being able to, hey, we don't have this niche, like we don't have an engineer that can rocket down the tank, so someone switch over on your next respawn to be an engineer so that we can deal with the tanks. Or, hey, we need some long range cover, switch over to recon. Or, hey, we need some resupply or some healing, someone jump on medic or jump on support and get us covered. And I think that is really cool. There's definitely some, you know, deployables and consumables, like the Assault has a cool adrenaline shot that you can use to rush in. Combining this with the destructible environments makes it feel really cool and unique and interesting. But I also feel like there's definitely a loss of identity for the classes in general if you don't have the restrictions on that for weapons, right? Like if I see an Assault running around with a sniper rifle, I feel like that's kind of weird. Like that just doesn't sit fit the same kind of thing. But I totally get the other side of it. You know, let me know what side of it, the argument you're on down below in the comments. You know, some people say, hey, let me use whatever I want. Let me have that freedom and let me choose and kind of create my own class on my own experience. You definitely lose out on the idea that if I see a certain, like all the classes have slightly different appearances. If I see someone in a ghillie suit and they're rushing me with a shotgun, you know, you kind of lose that identifiable aspect to them, but it does definitely give you the opportunity to be able to play around it and also create your own play style. And maybe it's better in the long term, especially for the cohort of players that want the faster gameplay, the more Call of Duty, Apex Legends gameplay, and they want to be able to play whatever kind of style they want, with whatever weapon they want. And maybe it feels more like the hot swapping of, say, like a Marvel Rivals or like an Overwatch, where you can constantly make adjustments on the fly. Maybe you need the class-based abilities of a certain class, but you still want to have your preferred weapon, and maybe that freedom allows you to kind of create that experience. But at least for me personally, my perspective is it feels like it kind of ruins the whole class system and that whole class identity, but let me know what you think about that down below. Now, it's also worth mentioning the plans that EA and Battlefield Studios have for the game in general. They just did an interview yesterday where they're talking about how they want to be a yearly title. So one of the biggest things for Call of Duty is they spun up 3 different studios. It was like Treyarch, Sledgehammer, and they did Raven for a while as well. But they basically had multiple studios making multiple Call of Duties all at once. And this was like the heyday, like mid 2010s, 2010s for this, where they would basically have like a 3 or 4 year cycle for making a Call of Duty. But because they had 3 studios doing it, they could release a new Call of Duty every year. And that is what they mentioned. Like the GM came on and said, "Head, that's what we want for Battlefield. We want a yearly Battlefield to come out, and we're going to spin up multiple studios that are all working on 2 to 3 year projects for new Battlefields and start pooping them out as fast as we can to kind of maximize that revenue and maximize that gameplay," which, you know, you can look at that as like a, you know, corporate perspective of like, you know, corporate is trying to make money, but also keep in mind that for the majority of people that play shooters like this, they burn hot. And what I mean by that is, you know, most people that play Call of Duty or Battlefield, they play it for a couple weeks to a couple months and then they get bored, right? Like they burn through the content, they burn through the maps, they burn through the play styles and the new mechanics and everything, and then they kind of get bored. And what happens is, as that player base declines over time, right? You have an initial onset of players coming on board with the game. As that player base declines, what's left of the player base are the people that are very good at that specific title, to the point where some people that may be, you know, on the, you know, beginner side or intermediate side start getting forced out of it, because the matchmaking becomes more and more of the people that are highly skilled because they've been playing Battlefield 6 all day, every day for a month straight. Then you get those people only being the people that you matchmake with in game. And so the intermediate players and the beginner players start falling off because they're tired of getting owned by people that only live and breathe Battlefield 6 all day, every day, that sort of thing. So, you know, the life cycle of these games tends to be a couple weeks to a couple months. And so the model of releasing a title every single year tracks with that. Baseball, huh? It lines up perfectly. And so them doing this, I think, makes a lot of sense. You know, the Call of Duty studios did that very well. And I think Battlefield doing it will probably find a good amount of success doing it. And if I were to get one final nitpick into the game, there's definitely some disparity in the weapon balance. Weapon balance in games like this is very hard to get right. I would say the biggest offender in Battlefield 6 is the shotgun. The shotguns have a dual fire, which means they have a primary, you know, spread shot fire, which is up close. If you hit like 80% of the pellets on the spread shot fire for shotgun in the right place, it's pretty much a one shot every single time, which means that if you're within, you know, 8 to 15 meters of someone and they have a shotgun, it's very likely they will one shot you in a single shot. However, they also have a slug shot mode, which is realistic for modern firearms. However, it can also, if it hits in the head, it can one-shot like a sniper rifle up to like 100 to 120 meters. So you will get sniped in the head from shotguns from football fields away. And I feel like that just feels very awkward. It's hard to get shotguns right. Most shooters, when they do shotguns, the shotguns are either too powerful or too weak. But I do think that like the slug feature on the shotguns in this game feels a little bit too much. And also the shotgun in general just feels like it's a little bit too strong. I don't think it's too far off. I think if you removed or reduced the effectiveness of the slug shot, especially at range, and then maybe make it so you have to hit 1 or 2 extra pellets on the spread, makes it so you have to be very accurate with the shotgun to kill it, you know, realistically, the TTK in this game, or time to kill, is so low that if you miss your first shotgun shot, even if someone has like an AR or an SMG or something, if they're as good as you are, they will probably kill you before you fire your second shot. So you kind of have to make sure that, you know, with good aim, the shotgun does have good kill potential. But I do feel like, you know, some of the weapons, like the shotgun specifically, are a little bit above the fold for balance in general. But that's something that they can polish out for launch, or even just with, you know, live balance updates to make that line up. But I digress. That's my feelings of Battlefield 6. I think in general, it is a very solid game. It's well made and well engineered, which I can always appreciate. The aesthetics and the feel of the game is really strong. And if this is something that you really like, if you like the kind of, you know, faster paced games with a little bit of Battlefield vibe to it, you're absolutely going to love this game. And, you know, like usual, you'll probably get a good amount, like, you know, 100 to a couple hundred hours out of this game just playing it. The grind seems good, but it doesn't mean that the game is not without its flaws. You definitely will have some, you know, some people looking for improvements to respawns, weapon balance, and potentially even adding more large maps. As we saw with the interview with the developer, they mentioned how they wanted to kind of capture multiple audiences, like have a small run and gun style mode that you can play inside of the game, but also have those larger maps with vehicles and aircrafts. Just don't expect, like when they said that they were going to bring back the old school Battlefield, I wouldn't say that they captured that completely. It definitely has some vibes to it as well, but you have options for how you want to play. So let me know what you think about Battlefield 6 down below in the comments, where your head is at if you played the beta. Are you someone that really enjoys the game and is super excited about the launch, or are you someone who's skeptical or perhaps even a little bit more you know, negative on that perspective, and why you may feel that way? Toss it down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.